Hi everyone, I'm Jaya Vishwanathan, and you've found the No Brainer podcast where I discuss all things neuroscience in delightful conversations with various experts. I hope you enjoy today's episode.
We're having the first generation of people who entered midlife with autism, intellectual disabilities, autism with intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, who were not institutionalized, who were included in education with supports. That we know that has a huge effect on the brain and the way the brain ages and the capacity for people to achieve certain things. So as Dr. Braden said, it could not be more important to understand how these schools age as compared to themselves. But it's expensive and it takes a long time, and that's not real satisfying for the world.
Right. And kind of that actually is a great segue. So for my next question, which is, as experts in the field, what do you think is really needed to be able to do also be inclusive of these high resource needs people, and then be able to do long-term longitudinal studies that are actually going to give us actionable insights into things like educational resources. I think that was a great point. Or schoolroom resources for parents to support their special needs kids better. And so I think these kinds of research can have a profound impact. But what are maybe some of the key barriers that are stopping people from, other than funding, which I know is a big issue?
I was going to say money.
Yeah. No, but this is great. But I think the fact that funding is so important for research also needs to be reinforced.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that comes to mind, and Dr. Cohen already touched on this, is I think bringing the world of development and aging together and understanding that these aren't actually two separate things that we're looking at. Aging or development is one lifelong trajectory. So the more that people can think about lifespan development or lifespan aging in that context, the more we can get people who are doing early education research connected with people who are doing, midlife and later life outcomes to see how all of these things link together. And of course, data and data sharing is a big part of that.
Yeah.
But also, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of stigma that comes with autism that is not necessarily, it's gotten better for a long time, but now we're at a time where people are scared to have an autism diagnosis documented for, certain public conversations that are happening right now.
Yeah. And that was, I think, probably our biggest barrier right now is trust between the research community, the scientific and medical community, and autistic individuals and their families. I think it's really scary. And there are those of us who are trying to create an environment of trust, but the world overall doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot to support that. And I think that, in research, we have to acknowledge that without our participants, we cannot do the work. And so we need to do more to bring participants into our studies, not as subjects, as we used to call them, but active members of the research team. And so that means engaging more autistic scientists, giving them the supports to do the work that we know they can do, but in a way where they're supported and they're given the resources. And a lot of that isn't happening and is actively sort of being pulled away.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, one area where we could do a much better job. But I agree with everything also Dr. Braden said. The more we share our data, the more we talk to each other, the more smart people that are thinking about a problem and will have new ideas.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. For those of you just tuning in, I'm having the best conversation with Dr. Braden and Dr. Cohen about, the intersection between dementia and autism in an aging population. So one question I have that I'm very curious about is, because I'm more familiar with the dementia literature. I work in Alzheimer's program development. And so right now there's been a big shift towards like looking at both the behavioral as well as the cognitive symptoms of dementia. Well, I think for a long time it was just the cognitive symptoms, right? Like the memory loss and the executive function and things like that. And so now there's like a whole PsychAD consortium, and people are trying to figure out things like agitation or sundowning and things like that. And so, again, with this idea of preliminary research that you both are doing, both together and separately, are you expecting differences in an autistic population in how they develop both behavioral as well as cognitive symptoms with dementia? Like, no?
So we've never, I mean,
like this one.
I was going to say, we've never, in all of our discussions, and we have had, I mean, we've been on 4 meetings today together.
Okay.
So we've never had this discussion. And so it's a great, really interesting question. And I think, you know, my gut instinct tells me I cannot imagine a scenario where there won't be at least small differences in presentation, especially with the emergence of the neuropsychiatric symptoms. And I think one really interesting thing in this population could be, as a dementia researcher, now there's the mild behavioral impairment,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That has been added to mild cognitive impairment. And so you really have to wonder if autistic individuals who are beginning to have cognitive problems, that certain autistic features may become more predominant during that time due to a whole, the
Right.
loss of ability to mask, those sorts of things. And these are folks who are going to end up being misdiagnosed with mild behavioral impairment, frontotemporal dementia, and those sorts of things. And I really think this is, again, not to, sell what our plans are to our reviewers, but the idea that we really need a longitudinal study to understand how the biomarkers change, how cognition changes, what remains stable, what might worsen, not because of Alzheimer's disease or not because of it's an actual symptom, but because the cognitive decline may be making autistic features worse. All of those are really what only a longitudinal study is going to be able to answer those questions, I think.
Yeah. Just to underscore that, autistic people really would tick off so many of these behavioral symptoms already that are being increasingly more recognized in dementia. So it's a big risk factor for being misdiagnosed and a really important thing to understand in the presentation of autistic people, how those things change or don't.
Yeah, so I think that's great because I think you're highlighting the importance of, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier about like communication, maybe across the aisle to clinicians working with patients to have like clear guidelines on how to like make accurate diagnoses, because people can very much suffer from misdiagnosis for years, and like they think they're like dealing with something and then turns out they have a whole different thing, and that can be really painful and frustrating. So I can just keep asking you so many questions. I think this is a fascinating conversation. So thank you again also for the educational component and talking to our audience here. So getting a little bit more technical. So I know both of you are using imaging techniques, biomarker development, but also like cognitive. How do you kind of reconcile these different things? Are you using AI, machine learning? Like, how are you kind of using these multimodal techniques and, again, both, and you mentioned data sharing as well, but like both individually and as a group? And then what are some of your approaches to kind of deconstruct these complex data sets?
I think that machine learning is going to be an important component to all of this. I think that in the PET imaging field, particularly tau PET imaging, we're still struggling a lot with what combining data across different types of tracers. There are now at least 4 tau PET tracers that are available that, depending on really where your study is and what's most available to you, are available. There are efforts to harmonize these tracers, which has been done with amyloid imaging really, really well. Like we have a pretty good handle on how to do that with amyloid imaging. So if I'm at ASU and I'm using one PET tracer, and then I'm in Pittsburgh and we're obviously using PIB because that's what we do, I can combine those, understanding that the data will be meaningful because we have a harmonization technique. We're not there yet with tau PET, and that really makes it challenging to try to combine across studies. Likewise, I think with MR scanners, we know that depending on what kind of scanner you collect the data on, and I'm not just talking about like a much stronger magnet than the other, just whether your scanner is made by one company versus another may affect how the data look. And there are machine learning techniques, there is some AI that can help with that. This is something, and I'm not even going to get into the blood biomarkers and how challenging it is there, but this is something that I think we have to reconcile just from a technical point of view. And then we're not even talking about how complex putting the biological pathway is.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to be very careful, because from my soapbox, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? Like the computer is only as smart as what you trained it on. And if what you trained it on was not rigorously collected, if it has these cohort biases that Dr. Braden talked about, that's not going to come out in the wash. It's all going to be baked into the data that you get. And so I think one of the things that we're trying to do with our efforts is to centralize what we know we can't harmonize. So that means like when we collect blood, it's all going to be assayed in one place. If we're collecting imaging, that we have agreement on what tracers we're using or a harmonization method, those kinds of things. So we sort of are controlling what we can control, so that this is a resource to the community, because sometimes bigger isn't better. I won't call out any specific studies in that, but we know that there have been challenges when, you're taking hundreds of thousands of data points and trying to put them together without the appropriate controls. My take on it is that, the more rigorous and careful we can be, the better our answers are going to be. But again, that's not particularly satisfying for people who want answers right now, because it takes time.
I love that as we should use that as our tagline. We're going to centralize what we can't harmonize.
Yeah.
And that was a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so lucky to get to benefit that the Alzheimer's and dementia field has done so much pioneering research in this space that I can bring a new study population to fall into step to these great protocols that have been being worked on over decades.
Right.
Not that they're perfect, but we definitely have shoulders of giants to stand on to take it from here.
And that's what's so exciting about the field that we're in. I started in PET neuroimaging and Alzheimer's disease in 2007. So I was like very lucky to see what amyloid imaging did to the field and what these giants were getting to do. And it was very exciting and very interesting. I'm even more excited now though, because these are really hard questions.
Yeah.
And they're really important questions.
They are.
That we get to benefit from all of that sort of boring harmonization that had to be done and is very important. But now we can like really dig our teeth into these really critical questions, and that these people who in some ways have been left behind by the research, we now get to come in and utilize all of this legwork that's been done to build this kind of research study. And that to me is just I think it's the most exciting time in my career.
And I'll just add that we're also building on what Dr. Cohen and her colleagues have done in Down syndrome, that everything that we're trying to do now with autism, they've already done in Down syndrome. So we get to follow that model. And it won't stop with autism, that we want to understand how all different types of neurodevelopment might uniquely impact someone's aging outcomes.
Yeah. I mean, that's like so Ben Handon, who's one of the pioneers in the Down syndrome world in this area, nobody thought he could get people with Down syndrome to lay in the scanner and do the imaging. And, he thought that was kind of crazy. He thought, there's no reason with the right supports and the right instructions that people can't do these studies. And so that's a really exciting place to be, is that kind of watch me phenomenon of underestimating certain populations. And now
Yeah.
we're seeing that pay dividends because the community has been so engaged and gracious with their time to the research community.
Yeah. No, this is fantastic. So my next question was about, what you were excited about, but your excitement is just pouring out of this topic. So, and it's great to see, researchers who are passionate about actually helping patients such as yourself. And so it's really wonderful to just see that, if I might just add a little plug there. So you talked a little bit about how you got into this, but I want to, ask a little bit more about your individual career trajectories and what brought you to studying this topic. And, again, also you have talked about this in like various parts of this episode, but just kind of like bringing it together, what, your past, present, and future in this.
I can go first. It's
Go
a
for it.
long, torturous path. So I actually started as a basic science researcher working in animal models of Parkinson's disease. So that was actually my PhD training, was as basically a neurobiologist doing animal model work in neurodegeneration. In those animal models, the thing I was most interested in was the idea of environmental enrichment and the impact the environment has on the aging brain. And through a whole series of mishaps, and they truly were mishaps, I was going to do a postdoc where I was going to study animal models of Parkinson's and gene therapy. The day that I was scheduled to leave, the person called me and told me they didn't have funding. And so I had to rethink my career plan.
Okay.
And when I did that, I thought, I'd really like to do a little bit more clinical work. I wanted to actually work with people. And so I got lucky enough that I asked around Pittsburgh. It also was, I'd been dating my husband, my now husband, for about 8 months, didn't really want to leave Pittsburgh. And so I asked around Pittsburgh if anybody would be willing to train me on neuroimaging, which in hindsight seems wild that I had enough confidence to be like, I don't know, I can do animal studies. But Bill Klunk, who's one of the co-inventors of Pittsburgh Compound B, had a large animal study that he needed someone to run without him looking over their shoulder.
I see.
He needed someone to take it and run. And he said, if you can do that, I will train you in PET imaging. And that's how I went down this road, and then got pulled into the Down syndrome work, walking down the hall when Bill Klunk and Ben Handon were having a meeting about this first sort of Down syndrome study, and they needed someone who knew neuroimaging. And that's how, and what I became passionate about in all of that was really creating authentic partnerships with the people in my studies. And so that's kind of how I got involved in the outreach and recruitment part of Down syndrome. And as I've done that work, what's become most important to me is identifying who's been left behind in these studies and trying to figure out ways that we can do that work when we know the risk is highest. And autism is particularly close to me because I have autistic kids. And so it all sort of converged in a way that I couldn't have scripted. But, I'm so excited about just where we are as a field. And I hope every day I wake up thinking, I love to do this, and I hope I get to do it for longer.
Yeah. I have a similar, different but similar in just like the way things work out, right?
Yeah.
All the way back to when I was a kid, my grandparents, the family business was a nursing home. So I spent a lot of time hanging out in a nursing home as a kid. And then my older sister, who was 12 years older than me, was a special education teacher. So I spent a lot of time hanging out in her classroom. People with dementia and autistic kids were just really part of my kind of like family culture experience.
I see.
And then in college, when I really fell in love with neuroscience, those were the two things that I really wanted to understand more about. What is it about the brain that leads to an autism-like development, or what is it about the aging brain that leads to dementia, especially since these are two outcomes for some, but by no means everyone, right? So my doctoral work was also more in aging and Alzheimer's and animal models too, in rodents.
Okay.
sex differences and hormones. So it's crazy how that's continued to be a part of my life.
Yeah.
And then doing a postdoc in human imaging and MRI, I was just sort of presented one day with, we're interested in studying autism in the lab. Does anyone want to take this on? And I said, me. And then we talked to our first autism collaborator, and he said, don't you guys do aging research? You should do that in autism because no one's done it yet.
Okay.
And I thought, wow, that is really full circle to my two, kind of things that I've most been interested in my whole life. And then I had two autistic kiddos. So just really rounding out, how compelling of an area this is to me.
Right. And what I'm hearing from both of you, which I think, is maybe underrated, is that you had like, I don't want to call it cognitive flexibility, but that's the word that's coming to mind, or like the openness when these opportunities came by to try something new. You were like, I'm gonna do it, and you didn't let fear, not to say that you weren't maybe nervous about doing something new, right? Like, I think all of us feel that. But I love that you did it anyway because you wanted to try something new, and look how well that's borne fruit, right? So that's
Absolutely.
awesome.
Yeah.
And I love Dr. Cohen's example that she was like, I was confident enough to say, who wants to train me in this? And that is so how you open these doors for yourselves as a trainee, is having that confidence to say that, I know if I work hard at something, I can do well at this, and being willing to put yourself out there for that.
And so often, I mean, so much of what we do is those soft skills that we're not really trained for. And I feel like, I don't know anybody who walked into a PhD program or a postdoc and had this very clear hypothesis of, this is what I'm going to do. But the people I know who've been really successful, what they've been willing to do is shoot their shot and say, this is interesting to me. What do you think? And usually that idea starts with well, I don't really think it's going to work that way, but what if we tried this? Or what if we tried this? And also to just have the confidence to say, yeah, I'll try to do that. I mean, the Down syndrome outreach thing, we've got over 100 people, faculty level people on that grant, and no one wanted to volunteer to do it. And I said, this sounds really hard, but also like, if it works, it'll be rewarding and incredible. And so like, it's kind of that we can do hard things. If it's important enough, you really can. And it's been the most rewarding thing I've done in my career.
That's fantastic. So what advice would you give to people who are maybe interested in this, in careers such as yours, getting their foot through the door, or even grad students who are like, oh, this sounds fantastic. What's my next step?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of what you've already mentioned of just taking opportunities that present themselves to you. So if you want to get a career in research, you might not get the opportunity to do the exact thing that you think that you want to do, but being willing to get some experience in some type of research, even to find out that that's maybe not for you, but that's going to lead doors to open. The more you build your network, the more you just try things that are available to you, as opposed to potentially banging your head against a closed door that's never going to open. That flexibility is really key to getting momentum building and going along.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, it's hard. That's the first thing I always tell people is this is not an easy career. I don't think any career is easy. They've all got goods and bads and challenges and rewards. But the most important thing to me in all of this has been, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Don't say that, and I'm full of all of the cliches today, but it really is the truth that, an opportunity, even if it's not a perfect opportunity, is probably going to benefit you more than not doing anything because the perfect opportunity didn't come along. And so I've had to work on some studies and some things that I absolutely, in retrospect, thought, God, I hated that study. I hated working on that data analysis or this, but it got me in conversations with the people in the rooms I wanted to be in. And so I think that there is, instead of banging your head against a closed door, take yes for an answer. You know,
Yeah.
if somebody's offering you an opportunity, it often means they see something in you.
Yeah.
And personal connections are just so important. And one last thing that I'll say is that the opportunities for self-teaching in this space are so much greater than they've ever been before. So, you know, back when Annie went to someone and said, teach me neuroimaging, now you can learn so much about neuroimaging on your own through freely available coursework online.
Yeah.
So there really, you know, should, if someone's passionate about getting experience in a certain area, do self-teaching to show people how serious you are and that you're coming in with some baseline knowledge and skills and can really take off running.
That's actually something that I have been so blown away by with students recently. So I'm like, how do you know this? I didn't know any of this. And it's the internet, and it ages me because it's like, oh, back when I was, you know, all there was a chat room with no actual information in it. But it really is that self-teaching. Like, people come in with understanding of statistics and imaging and things that I didn't know probably until I was faculty level, because the information is there. And don't be afraid to ask a professor if they're willing to have a meeting to talk about something you read. Those sorts of things. People in general, not everyone, but for the most part, I feel like most of my colleagues are like that. They want to help and they're excited about it. There's never a shortage of people willing to talk about what they're doing in this field, right? So
yeah.
Trainees should take that opportunity just to get, even if it's just like, should you get a PhD or should you go to medical school? Those reaching out to the people in your community for those kinds of conversations. I think, you know, it never hurts. Worst they can do is not answer the email. And then you know that that's someone you didn't want to talk to anyway.
That's right. That's great. That's great advice. And thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with our listeners. So do you have any other projects? They don't have to be science, like other projects that you're working on for the future that we can look forward to, or any other final thoughts to share with our audience today?
So I'll share one kind of cool non-science thing that I've been working on that I'm really excited once it finally comes out. Is there's a photographer, her name is Shayna Novak, and she's known kind of on social media and things as the heirloomist. And what she does is you send her family heirlooms, objects in your home, and she photographs them, and then it becomes a piece of art in your home. And so many years ago, we had collected all of my now almost 13-year-old daughter's shoes, from all of her tennis shoes from till she was about 6 years old. And I sent them to her to have them photographed. And then we had the outfit both of our children wore home, had those photographed. She reached out to me a few months ago about a project that she's working on where she's trying to highlight with art some of the things we stand to lose with budget cuts. And one of those is scientific research, mentoring, and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so I sent her an object, which was the hat that my mentor gave me. It says PIB across it. That was the first time you get a PIB grant or publish a PIB paper, he gives you those. He would give you one of those. And then when he retired, the tradition stopped, and I just restarted the tradition. So she took this very cool photo of the two hats on top of each other.
Oh, that's cool.
And I have to get a picture, and she printed it, and we've had it framed, and it's going to go in the waiting room of our office suite. And once we get that photographed, then she's working on a book for this, but they'll start as social media posts. She's working with it's all women also, which is really cool. She's working with a farmer who gets funding from USDA. There's a whole group of individuals. And so I'm really, really excited for that to come out and to see that, because I love her work, but also because it was just such a cool project and such an honor to be asked to be involved in it.
It's so cool. What's, speaks to me is when you were saying about asking about the things that we're excited about, which I am very passionate and excited about my aging research, but probably even more passionate and excited about the support program work that we do. So
I see.
That's the other side of, as much as we can understand the challenges that autistic people have across the lifespan, what can we offer to help support those challenges? And unfortunately, it's so much harder to get funding to do that work, despite the immediate benefit that it brings to people. Whereas, as we talked about, not that aging Research doesn't have long-term benefits, but it takes so long to get to real-world positive impacts for people. And we have support programs that we know could positively impact autistic adults today that we have such a hard time getting funding to deliver. But as you mentioned earlier, some of the work that I've done the most has been mindfulness. So teaching autistic people mindfulness meditation can be an absolute game changer in managing depression and anxiety.
I see.
And then other things that we've done, really borrowing from the aging literature. So interventions that places like Mayo have developed for people with mild cognitive impairment, tweaking them a little bit and offering those tips to autistic people to manage the overwhelming cognitive load of day-to-day life has been really effective. So that's all I'll end on, is that's the other part of what I do that I'm very passionate about.
That's the best answer. I'm so excited about that too.
No, this is fantastic. And Dr. Braden, if I might ask you to give maybe an information link or even a donation link for people who might be interested in volunteering, contributing, whatever, to this effort, I would be very delighted to share that as well. And good luck. I completely understand the frustrations about acquiring funding for doing important work. I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and if there's anything we can do to advertise or support, just please let me know. And on that note, I will say thank you both so much for sharing your time and your knowledge with our audience to talk about this very, very important topic. And I've certainly learned a lot. And I'm sure my audience would have as well. And yeah, thank you for doing this. And it was really a pleasure to chat with both of you today.
Thank you so much. It was tons of fun.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed this episode of the No Brainer podcast, and see you at the next one.
Discover the magical world of senses with Baby Senses, a sensory neuroscience primer for all ages. Journey through the wonder of sensory systems, from traditional human senses to extraordinary animal abilities, in this wonderful award-winning children's book by Dr. Jaya Vishwanathan. It brings to life a world hidden from the naked eye by blending neuroart with neuroscience to reveal nature's complexities and marvels. Baby Senses is an enchanting exploration of how we perceive our world. With a helpful glossary at the end, this book is perfect for young minds and curious adults. Dive into this beautifully illustrated masterpiece and awaken your senses to the beauty and diversity of life.